at the time. And then it was only a few days, I suppose, after that, that I was taken to my first meeting. There was only a few of them there. And that was then set for years then.
Stephen was abused by the group for the next 9 years. He would be collected from home at any time, day or night. And on occasions, he would even be picked up from school. He was taken to various locations, including houses and hotels, where he, and often other boys, would be subjected to the most appalling sexual abuse by one or more men.
Nobody questioned it, and sometimes it was during the day or the evening or at night or weekends. That was just part of life, really. And nobody said anything. Not a word. Strange, because they never said, don't tell. You hear people say, oh yeah, we were told not to tell. Nobody ever actually said that. But it was made very clear that if you broke the rules, or if you went against the group, you would just disappear, and no one would care. They had their rules, and you had to follow their rules without question. No crying, and not being unconscious. They didn't like it if you passed out. No passing out. So, and that was it. That was the rules that you had to follow. And were pretty much broken quite regularly.
Occasionally, Stephen would be brought to the group to be told that guests would be joining them. On more than one occasion, the guests would include Jimmy Savile.
You didn't always know beforehand. Sometimes we were told as we were, as I've been taken to wherever it happened to be, that there'd be a guest coming that evening or that day or whenever it was, but not always. No names were ever used, just didn't use names at all. And yeah, he came probably a couple of times a year over several years, just odd occasions. There was nothing different about the event, it just that there was somebody different there.
Did Savile abuse you directly?
Yes. Yeah. He was just sadistic in what he wanted to do and what he wanted other people to do. Yeah, just evil, and enjoyed seeing pain inflicted and humiliation, I suppose. It was hard to comprehend because you know who it is when you're sat watching TV and he's on the TV, and it's just really a strange feeling. I think all of us were just objects, and just the best way I can describe it is just sweets in a bag that you hand round and share. We meant nothing at all.
Stephen's abuse at the hands of the group stopped when he was 16. Only recently has he been able to talk about his horrific ordeal. Following the Savile revelations, he reported his abuse to the police.
It's a scary prospect. It's probably more comfortable to not believe things sometimes than to confront them. But we know that organised crime of this kind exists. And again, we need the police, the authorities, to have more resources in order to break them and to establish that the abuse of children in any form and by any perpetrator, organised or disorganised, is never ever acceptable. I believe that as more survivors speak out, and many of us are, the authorities will be compelled to act. It might be a long battle, but I think it is more than a battle. I think it's a war that we're in, and it's a war to protect our children.
Tragically for victims like Stephen, Savile's position as showbiz royalty, as well as his charity fundraising, once again ensured the rumours and gossip about his behaviour remained exactly that. It would only be after Savile had died that the shocking nature of his crimes would be laid bare.
It was good while it lasted, reads Jimmy Savile's headstone. The same can now be said of his reputation.
Jimmy Savile is now regarded as one of the most prolific sex offenders this country has ever seen. His reign of depravity lasted from the 1950s until his death in 2011. Throughout his life, he convinced most people he was nothing but an eccentric. But in 2009, allegations of abuse at Duncroft School forced the police into action. Savile was interviewed under caution at his office at Stoke Mandeville Hospital.
When the police are investigating somebody about a serious crime, and this is a very serious crime, the suspect would generally, surely, always be taken to a police station where they would be interviewed under caution. So that made it unusual immediately, and again, probably emphasised that the person in control of that interview was Jimmy Savile. It was not the police.
From what's coming out in the press, and most recently the transcript of his interview with Surrey Police, the tone of the interview is one of almost, I'm sorry I've got to ask you this again, but you know, we've had these allegations made to us, which is not really a very confident way of putting an allegation to get a structured response.
As well as his obvious denials of any wrongdoing, were the undercurrent of threats and intimidation within the interview. I mean, he virtually said that he would have them in the courts if they messed with him.
The authorities decided that given the lack of evidence, any pursuit of Savile was futile, and the charges were dropped. One of the last chances to bring one of Britain's most prolific child abusers to justice was lost. Jimmy Savile died in October 2011. Even after his death, a veil of secrecy covered the truth about his activities.
In mid-December 2011, I got a call from a BBC contact of mine who told me that there were various people working at the BBC who were unhappy about the fact that a Newsnight investigation into Savile had been axed in what were described to me as mysterious circumstances. So I did some digging over a period of about a week, and I discovered that indeed there had been a BBC Newsnight investigation into Savile, and it had been axed. It was made clear to me that several witnesses, middle-aged women, had come forward, and some of them had spoken on the record about abuse that they had suffered at the hands of Savile on BBC premises. So I put this to the BBC press office about 3 or 4 days before Christmas 2011. It took them 24 hours, but they did confirm that they had conducted this investigation. They told me it had been dropped for editorial reasons. I therefore had confirmation that the investigation had taken place. I knew what its contents were, and I tried to sell that story to 7 national newspapers over the next 2 weeks.
Despite the robust evidence backing up the allegations, not a single newspaper decided to run the story.
An executive from one very well-known newspaper told me that, in fact, his editor had also heard stories about Savile, but decided that because he'd only been dead for about 2 months by this point, it would be in bad taste to run the story. The doors closed, really, and the story was sort of no interest to any of them, which amazed me. I suddenly remembered that there was one person who not only might have had some knowledge of Savile as an individual, but who was sure to run the story because he has a reputation as a mischief maker. That person is Richard Ingrams, the editor of the Oldie magazine. He'd previously edited Private Eye for about 25 years. I rang Richard Ingrams, and within 30 seconds he said that he wanted to take the story, and he did indeed publish the allegations in full in the February 2012 issue of the Oldie. The Oldie article was the first occasion when any of the allegations against Savile were published in full.
On the 4th of October 2012, ITV broadcast Exposure, the other side of Jimmy Savile. For the first time, the whole country was aware of the allegations against the disgraced star.
I think everybody in Leeds watched it. It's not very nice to, somebody that you liked and trusted, being such a character.
I suppose my feelings were one of smugness, self-satisfaction. There you are, I told you so. Disappointment that it had taken so long. Disappointment that the guy had died so he couldn't face justice. But happy that it had come out.
The day after Exposure was broadcast, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation U-Tree, looking into the actions of Jimmy Savile, as well as numerous other allegations of historic sexual abuse.
The Metropolitan Police and the NSPCC painted a picture of abuse on an almost industrial scale.
Over 450 individuals have since come forward to allege that Savile abused them. Most were under 18 when the offences took place.
It doesn't matter how much money you raise for charity. If you are at the same time abusing children, abusing disabled people, robbing them of their dignity, robbing them of their childhood, making them incredibly unhappy, you can only be a bad person and your legacy will always be poisonous.
I think the Jimmy Savile outrage undoubtedly has a legacy. I mean, it has the legacy that, if you like, the can of worms is opened. The extent of abuse within society now is beginning to be accepted. Jimmy Savile was one offender. He doubtless abused thousands of people during the course of his lifetime. But we know that there are many millions of other people in this country who have suffered abuse at the hands of all sorts of other people. And the legacy that should follow such an outrage is that we don't allow this to be swept under the carpet any longer.
I think it's helped alert the British public to the scale of child abuse, not just involving celebrities, but involving other corruptors, destroyers of young lives. I think that it probably means that the prosecuting authorities and the police now take complaints or evidence of abuse far more seriously.
The police have been fantastic, because that was a nerve-wracking experience. And positives, I suppose, for my own life, because I'm now much more grounded with it, I suppose. I know what triggers me, I know what doesn't. It's easier to live with now. And hopefully that's going to enable me to get another relationship at some point.
I find it disturbing that political leaders who were, for example, so keen to call for the Leveson inquiry into misconduct in the press aren't doing the same for an overarching judicial inquiry into the much bigger and life-damaging consequences of multi-institutional failures in, over child abuse, going back, 30, 40, 50 years.
In October 2012, the elaborate headstone that marked Savile's final resting place in the North Yorkshire cemetery where he was buried was torn down. He now lies in an unmarked grave. The staggering scale of Savile's abuse continues to grow, and questions still remain about how he was able to prey on young, vulnerable children for over 50 years.
I think that is a reflection of